Hello, my name is Charlie, or C.E. McGill, and I am the author of Our Hideous Progeny. Recently, a book club in Wisconsin asked if they could send me some questions about Our Hideous Progeny, and I said, because I couldn't be there in person because of time zone constraints and everything like that, that I would make them up into a little video. And then I didn't do that for 4 months. Sorry, Brian, but I'm here now. So I thought I'd just go through and answer some of their questions and post it here for you guys to see as well. So this one's from Brian. What inspired you to use this period and to add to the Frankenstein mythos? So I actually came up with the idea for Our Hideous Progeny at university. I had a very weird DIY sort of create your own degree, which was called Interdisciplinary Studies, Self-Design, Narratives of Science in Fiction and History, which was just like a really interesting blend of history of science, history of science fiction and sort of genre fiction, and a bit of creative writing as well. I had to come up with a final year project for this that basically kind of brought a lot of these things together, and for a long while I was really just stuck for ideas. But then I ended up in one of my classes where we were studying science fiction as a genre. We were rereading Frankenstein. And in another one of my classes, we were looking at 19th century science, particularly that week at paleo art. I don't know if you've ever seen any Victorian paleo art, but it's really just completely wacky, out of this world. I mean, hugely scientifically inaccurate, but I really admire it just for the fact that this was kind of, you know, these are among the first attempts from professional scientists at depicting what the ancient world might have looked like. Before about the 19th century, there wasn't really sort of enough of a cohesive fossil record that a lot of these creatures could actually be imagined. But in the beginning of the 1800s, in the UK especially, there was a railroad craze, a canal craze, increase in mining activity, and so there were these huge amounts of earth being turned up in the United Kingdom and across various swathes of Europe as well. And in those bits of earth were fossils. And so by the mid-1800s, where Our Hideous Progeny is set, there was the Great Exhibition. And a scientist called Professor Richard Owen, who was a real guy and who also features in the book, designed these statues for the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, in order to kind of bring to the public the cutting-edge science of the time, and kind of bring the past to life in the public eye for the first time. And I was just really captivated by this. I ended up sort of doing more research on my own and doing an essay specifically on paleo art in the Victorian era. I was just so captivated by it, and I had the thought of, you know, what if some descendant of Victor Frankenstein lived in this era and wanted to bring their own theories to life in a very literal way. I didn't take it seriously at all at first. I thought it was a really kind of, you know, funny joke idea, but the more I thought about it and the closer I got to the deadline where I had to submit an idea for my final project, the more I realized that, you know, this idea actually had legs. It actually did have interesting sort of, you know, themes and everything that I wanted to explore. I think that this whole idea of, you know, if you imagine that you're an average person in the 19th century, you have never up until this point really considered the prehistoric past beyond, you know, what's sort of said in the Bible. And then you go to the Crystal Palace, you see these dinosaurs, you realize essentially that there used to be sharp-toothed monsters walking the earth. I mean, that's a horror story, basically. It's very gothic. I think it actually fits with the themes of Frankenstein very well. All right, next we have from Paul. How did you get into the mindset of your character for that time period? Well, I read a lot of Victorian scientific papers. There's the Transactions of the Geological Society and the Transactions of the Royal Society and everything, that most of which have been entirely digitized and put online. So I read a lot of those just to get an idea of sort of the scientific terminology that would have been used, and different kind of, you know, Victorian textbooks on geology and stuff like that, to get an idea of the kind of sources that Mary and Henry would use as they are trying to create their plesiosaur. And a lot of those sources actually ended up being given sort of cameos and shout-outs in the book. You can see quotes from some of them at the beginning of different chapters. because I wanted to really kind of, give readers a taste of that kind of scientific atmosphere and immerse them in the era. I also, just in general, tried to read a lot of other historical fiction books set in the Victorian period. Victorian fiction itself can be a bit impenetrable in terms of prose for some people or for modern readers, and so I wanted to see kind of how other people had gone about capturing that mood, but while still making it accessible. So I really liked, for instance, The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton, the Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins, all of Sarah Waters' work. I just kind of like dove in and just let that kind of, mood and the prose just wash over me. All right, now we have from Laura, how plausible do you feel something such as the recreation of a plesiosaur actually is? I don't really think so, unfortunately. I mean, I'm not a geneticist, I'm not actually a scientist, but my feeling is that it's probably not possible. But then again, that sort of wasn't really my goal when I was writing the book, because I knew from the get-go that I was setting this in the same universe as Frankenstein. And Frankenstein is set in a universe in which you can actually bring someone to life with electricity and with galvanism. And so I knew already we were working in a universe that was, operating on different rules. And so I wasn't so much concerned with, scientific accuracy as sort of figuring out how an 1850s scientist would go about trying to bring a plesiosaur to life. Maybe I'll be proved a fool, maybe next year we'll find some sort of weird stem cells and some bone marrow and we'll have plesiosaurs swimming around, but unfortunately I don't think that's happening anytime soon. Alright, this is from Gary. How much research went into the book? What is your experience and background in science? So like I said, I'm not an actual scientist. I was studying engineering for a couple of years before I realized that I really didn't want to be an engineer. Had my sort of, quarter-life crisis and then changed majors to my weird DIY major. But all throughout my sort of teen years, I was really fascinated with the history of science, devoured my library's whole section on it. And for this book in particular, like I said, I read lots of Victorian scientific papers, different sources on sort of, the Victorian conception of like where life actually comes from. There was this idea called like the vital principle, which was almost like a sort of halfway point kind of reconciling like a more spiritual idea of like the soul and the scientific idea of, well, there has to be, something that kind of quantifies what life is, something that leaves a body once it dies. And so that was really fascinating, reading more about that and reading even about the concept of like spontaneous generation, which, if you didn't know, is the idea of like life springing from nothing. In the medieval period, there was the idea, for example, that like flies were just spontaneously generated, which honestly anyone who's ever had a fruit fly in their kitchen, I think, would agree with. They do just formulate out of midair. I'm sorry that they do. But that idea kind of persisted in some ways until the 1800s, which surprised me. And there were a few different experiments which, in retrospect, were probably, poorly done. But which seemed to prove that, sometimes life could come from processes like, fermentation or, stuff like that, just spontaneously. And so those were the ideas that I kind of built upon when Harry and Mary were looking for a kind of, reason why Victor Frankenstein's method was able to work. I thought that would probably be an idea that they would seize on. Here is another one from Brian. How does it feel to have a book come out when Frankenstein seems to be the zeitgeist? With a couple movie and TV shows and other related media, was this a planned thing with your publisher or just providence? I mean, that was pure chance. I think that, like all things, things go in waves. There was the 200-year anniversary of the first publication of Frankenstein a few years ago. I'm actually kind of mad that I didn't get to coincide with that, but I was still in engineering and everything at that point, so I was going to miss that anyway. But I think, things come in waves, things have waves of popularity, and at the moment Frankenstein is in, which I'm very glad about, because I think it's definitely contributed to getting more people interested in the book. I'm extremely excited for the Guillermo del Toro adaptation of Frankenstein that's supposed to come out in a little while. I keep going to the movie theatre and sitting down waiting for it, and the staff tell me to leave because it's not out yet, but I'm already there. Finally, Carl says, what are you reading and what inspired you? I always have about 5 different books on the go at once, but one of them that I'm actually right in the middle of at the moment is this beautiful proof of The Library Thief by 𝐁𝐮𝐲 𝐎𝐔𝐑. It's an advanced copy, but it came out 2 months ago. I'm so slow at reading proofs. If anyone has ever sent me an advanced copy of anything, I'm sorry, I will get to it. I'm just incredibly slow at reading physically, but I'm really enjoying this one so far. It's got a lot of sort of book binding, history of bookmaking, which is really interesting. So yeah, I'm excited to finish the rest of it. In terms of general inspirations, I think in terms of like sort of prose and historical fiction wise, for Our Hideous Progeny specifically, I've already mentioned Sarah Collins, Sarah Waters, Susanna Clarke, Madeline Miller, Carmen Maria Machado. I actually have her short story collection right behind me, and I will just like open it up occasionally and just sort of like drink in some of her writing whenever I need inspiration. Erin Morgenstern as well. And then in terms of, I guess sort of like science fiction and fantasy inspirations, I grew up with science fiction and fantasy. I feel like it is my home genre. I grew up reading a lot of Diane Duane, Anne Rice, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, the Edge Chronicles. Where are they? I have like about 15 of the Edge Chronicles books somewhere around here. Our Hideous Progeny is, I suppose, kind of very grounded or down to earth as far as science fiction goes, but I really love some, you know, space opera as well, some really out there stuff. Octavia Butler, all of her writing freaks me out in the best way possible. 𝐷𝐷𝐿 Martin, Memory Called Empire, read that recently and absolutely loved it. N.K. Jemisin, I've only just started her Broken Earth series recently, and really excited to get into it. This Is How You Lose the Time War. I had to grab it off my shelf so I could shake it at you. If anyone here has not read this yet, you need to. Also Gideon the Ninth. I don't have a physical copy actually of Gideon the Ninth because I have the audiobook, but if you haven't read Gideon the Ninth, you also need to read it now. So that's all I've got for today. Hope this was interesting. If your curiosity is piqued and you haven't read it yet, Our Hideous Progeny, out now, everywhere the books are sold. And I hope you all stick with me as well for my next book, which is hopefully coming out next year. And which is going to be another sort of like 19th century Victorian Gothic, this time with vampires. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye!